According to international reports, a high-level message has been sent directly from Washington to Beijing as former U.S. President Donald Trump personally contacted Chinese President Xi Jinping regarding a sensitive issue involving Iran. The request was explicit, urging China to immediately halt any possible involvement in supplying military-related support to Tehran, as U.S. intelligence agencies began detecting unusual signals. These concerns emerged alongside reports suggesting that certain military components could be moving through indirect channels, raising questions about hidden supply routes. Although Beijing has firmly denied the accusations and stated that it does not provide weapons to any party in the conflict, the situation on the ground has continued to escalate. At the center of this growing tension lies the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic waterway through which nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes each day. Analysts warn that if any form of external military support to Iran is confirmed, the balance of power in the region could shift rapidly and unpredictably. In such a scenario, the Strait of Hormuz would transform from a vital trade route into a geopolitical pressure point capable of disrupting the global economy. Trump did not limit his response to private communication, as he publicly warned that any country supporting Iran could face severe economic consequences, including unprecedented tariffs. Meanwhile, reports have indicated an increased Chinese presence near key maritime zones, with officials emphasizing the protection of trade flows and long-term energy interests. This has created a direct contrast between Washington's suspicions and Beijing's official statements, forming a complex and tense geopolitical standoff. As intelligence leaks continue to surface and military activity intensifies across the region, uncertainty continues to grow. The central question remains unresolved. Is there a hidden layer of cooperation behind the scenes, or is this a rapidly escalating geopolitical confrontation driven by suspicion and strategic pressure? Welcome to our channel, where we break down the most critical global developments shaping today's geopolitical landscape. This unfolding situation between the United States, China, and Iran is not an isolated incident, but part of a much larger strategic competition that has been building for years. At its core, the tension reflects a growing rivalry between Washington and Beijing, where economic interests, military positioning, and global influence are increasingly intertwined. Iran, positioned at the center of the Middle East, has become a key piece in this broader equation due to its strategic location and its role in global energy supply chains. For decades, Tehran has faced sanctions and pressure from the United States, while simultaneously seeking partnerships that could help sustain its economy and defense capabilities. China, on the other hand, has steadily expanded its economic and energy ties with Iran, becoming one of its most important trading partners, particularly in the oil sector. This relationship has raised concerns in Washington, especially as tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate and military activity intensifies across the region. The Strait of Hormuz plays a central role in this dynamic, acting as a narrow but vital corridor through which a significant portion of the world's oil exports must pass. Any disruption in this area would not only affect regional stability but could also send shockwaves through global markets, impacting energy prices and economic growth worldwide. Against this backdrop, even unconfirmed reports of military cooperation or indirect support become highly sensitive and potentially destabilizing. The possibility that weapons systems, materials, or technological support could be transferred through third-party networks adds another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. Meanwhile, both Washington and Beijing are navigating this crisis carefully, balancing public statements with strategic actions behind the scenes. The United States is signaling readiness to impose economic consequences, while China emphasizes its commitment to stability and the protection of its economic interests. This creates a situation where official narratives and real-world developments may not always align, increasing uncertainty and speculation. At the same time, the region itself is becoming increasingly unstable, with military operations, missile launches, and security incidents spreading across multiple countries. These developments suggest that the current tension is not limited to diplomacy, but could have far-reaching consequences across military, economic, and political domains. As global powers position themselves and regional actors respond to shifting dynamics, the risk of miscalculation continues to grow. In such an environment, Even a single misinterpreted action or intelligence report could trigger a chain reaction with unpredictable outcomes. This raises several critical questions that remain unanswered. Is the current situation driven by concrete evidence or by strategic suspicion amplified by geopolitical rivalry? Are global powers moving toward confrontation or attempting to negotiate behind closed doors while maintaining public pressure? And most importantly, if the balance in this region is disrupted, how far could the consequences spread beyond the Middle East? The sequence of events began to draw global attention when former U.S. President Donald Trump publicly confirmed that he had directly sent a message to Chinese President Xi Jinping regarding Iran. In a televised interview, Trump stated that he had asked Beijing to halt any potential involvement in supplying weapons or military-related support to Tehran. According to his statement, the Chinese side responded by assuring that no such actions were taking place. However, this response did not fully resolve concerns in Washington, as intelligence assessments continued to point toward possible indirect channels of support. Sources familiar with classified reports indicated that certain defense-related systems, including portable missile platforms, could have been transferred through third-party networks. Although no confirmed evidence has shown Chinese weapons being used directly on the battlefield, the accumulation of these signals has been enough to raise alarm. Trump did not remain silent in response to these developments. He issued a strong warning, stating that any country found supporting Iran could face severe economic penalties from the United States. Among the measures mentioned was the possibility of tariffs reaching up to 50%, a level described by analysts as highly aggressive. This statement signaled a shift from mere suspicion toward potential economic confrontation. At the same time, Trump noted that China had expressed willingness to cooperate in maintaining stability in key maritime routes, particularly the Strait of Hormuz. This created a paradox, as diplomatic assurances appeared to conflict with emerging intelligence signals. While public statements emphasized cooperation, underlying concerns continued to grow. Meanwhile, attention rapidly shifted toward the Strait of Hormuz, which became the focal point of the entire situation. As speculation about military support intensified, the strategic importance of this narrow waterway became even more apparent. Control over this route would directly influence global energy flows and economic stability. At the same time, China responded strongly to the accusations. A spokesperson speaking from Washington stated that Beijing had never provided weapons to any party involved in the conflict. The statement also criticized the United States for making what it described as unfounded claims. Despite these denials, additional reports suggested that certain Chinese companies continued supplying sensitive materials to Iran. Among these materials were chemical components considered essential in the production of missile fuel. This detail added another layer of complexity to the situation, as such materials fall into the category of dual-use goods. While not classified strictly as weapons, they can play a critical role in military capabilities. As tensions escalated, military activity began to increase in the region. China's defense minister confirmed that Chinese naval vessels were actively operating in and around key maritime zones. These areas include routes through which a significant portion of global oil shipments passes. The presence of these naval forces was interpreted as a clear signal of China's strategic intentions. Rather than withdrawing from the region, Beijing appeared to be reinforcing its position. Officials emphasized that their objective was to protect commercial routes and safeguard long-term energy agreements with Iran. This stance suggested that China viewed its relationship with Iran as a core strategic interest rather than a negotiable position. The implications of these actions quickly became apparent to analysts. Deploying naval assets in such a sensitive region was not merely a defensive measure. It also indicated a readiness to maintain long-term presence despite external pressure. At the same time, commercial shipping activity continued through the Strait of Hormuz without major interruption. This allowed China to demonstrate that it still maintained access to critical energy flows. On the other side, the United States closely monitored every movement in the region. Any shift in military positioning or commercial traffic was seen as a potential trigger for escalation. Analysts began to openly discuss the possibility of a direct strategic confrontation. As one side increased its military presence and the other applied economic pressure, the space for diplomatic compromise narrowed. Statements from Beijing reaffirming its refusal to accept external interference further defined the boundaries of the standoff. China made it clear that its ties with Iran were part of a long-term strategic calculation. These developments unfolded just as preparations were underway for a high-level meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping. Instead of easing tensions, the controversy surrounding Iran cast a shadow over the entire diplomatic process. Washington entered the talks with unresolved questions based on intelligence assessments and emerging reports. At the same time, Beijing maintained its position, rejecting the accusations while defending its economic and energy partnerships. This resulted in two fundamentally different perspectives heading into the same negotiation. Observers noted that the outcome of this meeting could significantly influence the trajectory of the crisis. If no common ground were found, further escalation would likely follow. On the other hand, even a limited understanding could temporarily reduce pressure. However, the situation on the ground continued to evolve rapidly. Iran expanded its military operations across multiple areas in the region. Hundreds of missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles were launched toward targets associated with opposing forces. These targets included military bases, energy infrastructure, and in some cases, civilian areas. The intensity of these attacks placed immense pressure on regional defense systems. In some instances, countries were forced to use up to 70 to 75% of their interceptor missile stockpiles within a short period. This level of resource consumption raised serious concerns about sustainability. Iran's strategy did not rely on concentrated strikes in a single location. Instead, attacks were distributed across multiple fronts and extended over time. This approach made it difficult for defensive systems to predict and respond effectively. Another critical development emerged from recent analyses. Iran was believed to be utilizing satellite-based intelligence to monitor military activity in the region. This allowed for more precise targeting and adjustments in attack patterns. If confirmed, this would represent a significant advancement in operational capability. The impact of these developments extended beyond military operations. Airspace across several countries became increasingly restricted. Civilian flights were forced to alter routes, leading to longer travel times and increased operational costs. At the same time, key energy facilities were placed on high alert. The message from Tehran was clear. Any country allowing its territory to be used for military action against Iran could become a target. This warning effectively expanded the scope of the conflict. As a result, even countries not directly involved found themselves drawn into the broader tension. To understand why the current situation has become so sensitive, it is necessary to look at the historical context behind the relationships between the United States, China, and Iran. For decades, Iran has been at the center of geopolitical tension, particularly due to its nuclear program, regional influence, and long-standing confrontation with the United States. Since the late 20th century, Washington has imposed multiple layers of sanctions targeting Iran's economy, energy sector, and financial system. These measures were designed to limit Tehran's ability to develop military capabilities and to pressure its government into policy changes. However, rather than isolating Iran completely, these sanctions pushed the country to seek alternative partnerships. China gradually emerged as one of the most important partners in this context. Over the years, Beijing expanded its economic engagement with Tehran, particularly through energy trade agreements and infrastructure cooperation. Iran became a key supplier of oil to China, providing a stable source of energy for the world's second-largest economy. In return, Chinese companies gained access to strategic projects and long-term investment opportunities within Iran. This relationship evolved into a complex interdependence, where economic interests became deeply tied to geopolitical strategy. At the same time, China maintained a careful diplomatic balance. Beijing avoided direct military involvement while continuing to strengthen economic ties, allowing it to benefit from the relationship without provoking direct confrontation. This approach has often been described as a strategy of indirect influence. Meanwhile, the United States has consistently viewed Iran as a destabilizing force in the Middle East. American policy has focused on limiting Iran's regional influence, particularly its support for allied groups and its military capabilities. This has resulted in repeated cycles of tension, including military confrontations, economic sanctions, and diplomatic negotiations. One of the most significant moments in this history was the nuclear agreement negotiated in the early 21st century. The deal aimed to restrict Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. However, the agreement faced ongoing challenges and disagreements, eventually leading to renewed tensions. As these tensions intensified, the role of external powers became increasingly important. China's continued economic engagement with Iran drew attention from Washington, especially as competition between the two global powers expanded. This competition is not limited to trade or technology, but extends into strategic regions such as the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz represents a critical element in this broader context. For Iran, it serves as a strategic leverage point, allowing it to influence global energy flows. For China, it is a vital artery for energy imports that sustain its economic growth. For the United States, it represents both a security concern and a strategic priority to ensure free navigation. This overlapping set of interests creates a highly sensitive and complex environment. Any action taken by one side can have immediate consequences for the others. In addition, the nature of modern conflict has evolved. Direct military engagement is no longer the only form of competition. Instead, indirect methods such as economic pressure, technological support, and proxy networks have become increasingly common. This makes it more difficult to clearly identify the boundaries between cooperation and confrontation. The concept of dual-use materials further complicates the situation. Items that have both civilian and military applications can be transferred under legitimate trade agreements but later used in military contexts. This creates ambiguity and allows actors to deny direct involvement while still influencing outcomes. Another important factor is the role of intelligence and information. Modern geopolitical conflicts are often shaped by incomplete or classified data. Decisions are made based on assessments that may not always be publicly verifiable. This increases the risk of misinterpretation and escalation. At the same time, the global economy is deeply interconnected. Any disruption in energy supply chains, particularly through critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, can have immediate worldwide impact. This creates pressure on all major powers to protect their interests while avoiding uncontrolled escalation. However, balancing these objectives is extremely challenging. Each actor is operating based on its own strategic priorities, which do not always align. This is why even unconfirmed reports of military support can trigger significant reactions. They are not viewed in isolation, but as part of a broader pattern of competition and influence. As a result, the current situation cannot be understood as a single event. It is the product of long-term strategic dynamics that continue to evolve. And within this context, even small developments can carry disproportionate significance. To fully understand the implications of the current situation, it is important to examine the technical and operational aspects behind the developments on the ground. One of the most critical elements lies in the nature of the suspected military support, particularly the possibility of transferring portable missile systems and sensitive materials through indirect channels. Portable air defense systems, often referred to as manpads, are designed to target aircraft at low altitude and are relatively easy to transport compared to larger weapon systems. If such systems were to reach Iran through third-party networks, they could significantly enhance defensive capabilities against aerial threats. At the same time, reports of chemical components linked to missile fuel production introduce another layer of concern. These materials, while not classified strictly as weapons, are essential in the manufacturing process of rocket propulsion systems. Their transfer falls into the category of dual-use technology, making it difficult to regulate and monitor effectively. This creates a technical gray zone where civilian trade and military application can overlap. On the battlefield, Iran's operational strategy has demonstrated a high level of adaptability. Rather than concentrating force in a single location, attacks have been distributed across multiple targets over extended periods. This approach forces opposing defense systems to spread resources and maintain constant readiness. In practical terms, such a strategy can overwhelm even advanced interception systems. Reports indicating that some countries have used up to 70 to 75% of their interceptor missile stockpiles highlight the intensity of these engagements. This level of consumption raises serious questions about sustainability in prolonged conflict scenarios. Another key technical factor involves the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, commonly known as drones. These systems allow for flexible deployment and can be used for both reconnaissance and strike missions. When combined with missile systems, they create a layered attack structure that is difficult to counter. The addition of satellite-based intelligence further enhances operational effectiveness. By monitoring real-time movements and adjusting targeting data, such systems can significantly increase accuracy. If Iran is indeed utilizing external satellite data, it would represent a major shift toward networked warfare capabilities. In the maritime domain, the situation becomes even more complex. The Strait of Hormuz is not only narrow but also heavily trafficked, making military operations highly sensitive. Any attempt to control or disrupt this route requires precise coordination and constant surveillance. The reported deployment of naval assets by China adds another dimension to the operational environment. Naval presence in such a strategic area serves multiple purposes, including deterrence, monitoring, and protection of commercial shipping. At the same time, it introduces the risk of unintended encounters between military forces from different countries. Even routine maneuvers can be misinterpreted in a high-tension environment. Mine warfare is another critical aspect highlighted in recent developments. Instead of deploying mines across wide areas, placing them in strategic choke points can create maximum disruption with minimal resources. This forces naval forces to conduct time-consuming clearance operations, slowing down traffic and increasing uncertainty. From a technical perspective, clearing mines in a busy maritime corridor like Hormuz is an extremely complex task. It requires specialized equipment, coordination among multiple units, and continuous monitoring. In the air domain, the impact of missile and drone activity extends beyond military targets. Civil aviation is directly affected, as flight paths must be adjusted to avoid potential conflict zones. This increases operational costs and creates logistical challenges for airlines. Air traffic control systems must simultaneously track civilian and military movements, increasing the risk of error. Cyber operations also play a significant role in modern conflict scenarios. Distributed network attacks, data breaches, and system disruptions can affect critical infrastructure without direct physical engagement. Reports of coordinated cyber activity targeting energy systems, financial institutions, and data networks suggest a multi-layered strategy. Such operations are difficult to attribute and even harder to counter completely. They create an environment where the battlefield extends beyond physical space into digital systems. At the same time, defensive responses must adapt to these evolving threats. Military forces, intelligence agencies, and cybersecurity units are required to operate in close coordination. Rapid information sharing and real-time analysis become essential components of effective response. However, the scale and complexity of these operations make complete control nearly impossible. As multiple actors engage simultaneously across different domains, the risk of escalation increases. Each technical development, whether in weapons systems, surveillance, or cyber capabilities, contributes to a broader and more complex conflict environment. This interconnected structure means that actions in one domain can have immediate consequences in others. As a result, the current situation represents not just a regional conflict, but a multi-dimensional operational challenge involving military, technological, and economic factors. As the situation continues to escalate, international reactions have begun to emerge, reflecting growing concern across multiple regions. The United States has taken a firm stance, signaling that it is prepared to respond not only through diplomatic channels but also through economic measures. Officials in Washington emphasized that any form of support to Iran would be closely monitored and could trigger immediate consequences. This approach demonstrates a strategy of combining intelligence assessment with economic deterrence. At the same time, the United States has increased coordination with its regional allies. Military and intelligence cooperation has been strengthened to track developments and respond to potential threats. This includes monitoring maritime activity, missile launches, and cyber operations across the region. Meanwhile, China has maintained a consistent public position, rejecting all accusations of military involvement. Chinese officials have reiterated that Beijing does not supply weapons to parties involved in the conflict. They have also criticized what they describe as unverified claims and emphasized the importance of stability. At the same time, China continues to underline its commitment to protecting international trade routes and energy security. This dual messaging reflects a balance between denying involvement and safeguarding strategic interests. Other global actors have also expressed concern. European observers have highlighted the potential risks to energy markets and regional stability. Any disruption in the Strait of Hormuz would directly affect global oil supply and could lead to significant economic consequences. This has led to increased attention from financial markets and energy analysts. In addition, regional countries have begun to adjust their security posture. Several governments have raised alert levels for critical infrastructure, particularly energy facilities and transportation networks. Airspace restrictions have been implemented in response to ongoing missile and drone activity. Civil aviation authorities are working to ensure safety while maintaining essential flight operations. At the same time, diplomatic channels remain active. Efforts are being made to prevent further escalation and to maintain communication between key actors. However, the gap between public statements and underlying tensions continues to present challenges. In parallel, the upcoming high-level meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping has drawn significant international attention. Observers view this meeting as a critical opportunity to address the growing crisis. At the same time, expectations remain cautious, given the differences in position between the two sides. Washington is expected to raise concerns related to Iran directly during the discussions. Beijing, on the other hand, is likely to reaffirm its existing stance and emphasize economic cooperation. This creates a complex diplomatic environment where both sides must navigate carefully. Any statement or outcome from the meeting could have immediate global impact. Energy markets, financial systems, and geopolitical alignments are all sensitive to shifts in this situation. At the same time, uncertainty remains a defining factor. International actors are responding based on evolving information, which is not always complete or fully verified. This increases the risk of miscalculation and unintended escalation. As a result, the current situation has moved beyond a bilateral issue. It has become a matter of global concern, involving multiple actors and interconnected interests. The way these reactions develop will play a crucial role in determining the next phase of the crisis. As the situation continues to evolve, analysts have begun outlining several possible scenarios that could shape the next phase of the crisis. The first scenario involves continued escalation driven by mutual suspicion and strategic pressure. In this case, the United States could move forward with stronger economic measures, including the implementation of high-level tariffs against countries suspected of supporting Iran. Such actions would likely be met with firm responses from China, potentially increasing geopolitical tension between the two major powers. At the same time, military activity in the region could intensify further. Naval deployments, missile operations, and surveillance activities may expand, increasing the risk of direct confrontation. In a highly sensitive environment like the Strait of Hormuz, even a minor miscalculation could trigger a rapid chain reaction. The second scenario involves a controlled stabilization through diplomatic engagement. In this case, high-level talks between Washington and Beijing could lead to a temporary understanding. Such an outcome might not resolve underlying tensions but could reduce immediate pressure and prevent further escalation. This would require both sides to balance public messaging with private negotiations. Even a limited agreement on maintaining maritime stability or restricting indirect support could have a stabilizing effect. However, this scenario depends heavily on mutual trust, which remains fragile. The third scenario represents a prolonged period of uncertainty. In this situation, no clear resolution is achieved, and tensions remain at a constant but manageable level. Military activities continue, but without crossing thresholds that would trigger large-scale conflict. Economic pressure persists, and diplomatic efforts remain inconclusive. This creates a state of ongoing instability where risks are continuously present but not fully realized. Each of these scenarios carries its own set of consequences. Escalation could lead to significant disruption in global energy markets. Any instability in the Strait of Hormuz would directly impact oil supply and pricing, affecting economies worldwide. At the same time, prolonged tension could strain international alliances and reshape geopolitical alignments. Countries may be forced to reassess their positions based on shifting risks and interests. Another critical factor is the role of non-state actors and indirect involvement. As conflicts become more complex, actions carried out through proxies or decentralized networks could further blur the lines of responsibility. This increases the difficulty of managing escalation and responding effectively. Cyber operations, economic influence, and information warfare may continue to expand alongside traditional military activity. In such a multi-layered environment, predicting outcomes becomes increasingly difficult. At the same time, internal dynamics within the region also play a role. Economic pressure, public response, and political stability within affected countries could influence decision-making processes. Leaders may adjust strategies based on both external threats and internal pressures. This adds another level of unpredictability to the situation. As all these factors interact, the margin for error becomes smaller. Decisions must be made quickly, often based on incomplete information. This increases the likelihood of unintended consequences. In this context, the current situation remains highly fluid and uncertain. While immediate outcomes are unclear, the potential for broader impact continues to grow. This raises a final and critical question. Are global powers approaching a turning point that could redefine regional stability? Or is this another phase in an ongoing cycle of tension and strategic competition? As the situation continues to unfold, what began as a single message between two leaders has expanded into a complex geopolitical issue involving multiple actors and overlapping interests. The initial concern over potential military support has evolved into a broader discussion about strategic influence, economic pressure, and regional stability. At the center of this development lies a delicate balance between suspicion and cooperation. While official statements emphasize denial and stability, underlying tensions continue to shape actions on the ground. The Strait of Hormuz remains a critical focal point, representing both opportunity and vulnerability for all parties involved. Any disruption in this area carries consequences that extend far beyond the region. At the same time, the interaction between the United States, China, and Iran highlights the complexity of modern geopolitical competition. Direct confrontation is no longer the only path, as indirect influence, economic leverage, and technological capabilities play increasingly important roles. This creates a landscape where actions are not always visible, but their impact can be significant. The current situation also demonstrates how quickly localized tensions can expand into global concerns. Energy markets, international trade, and security systems are all interconnected, making the stakes higher than ever. As global actors continue to respond, the margin for error remains extremely narrow. Decisions made under pressure, based on incomplete information, carry the risk of unintended consequences. At this stage, the outcome remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that the situation has not reached its conclusion. Developments are ongoing, and each new movement has the potential to reshape the broader picture. This leaves us with a final set of questions. Is this a moment of temporary tension, or the beginning of a deeper strategic shift? Are current actions part of a calculated approach, or reactions to rapidly changing circumstances? And as global powers continue to navigate this complex environment, how far could the impact extend beyond what is currently visible? If you found this analysis useful, consider staying connected for more in-depth breakdowns of global events. Share your perspective in the comments, and let us know how you see this situation developing.